When I started the sleep chapter, I was pretty indifferent about it. I didn't have any new or interesting realizations. Everything was kind of same old, same old. But then towards the end, as I was finishing up the exercises in this chapter, I got a sudden burst of ideas and I'm still very excited about them. So this chapter ended up being a light blue cloud for me, and I'll go through the reasons why as we move through the spreads. Here is the title page for the sleep chapter. And can I just say, I love the theme for this month. I chose this little rabbit character. I think it's called Mo Lang, and it was just such a fun and easy character to draw. I chose a quote that's attributed to the Dalai Lama, and it reads, "Sleep is the best meditation." And for some reason, whenever I read this quote, I also think sleep is the best mediation, which is probably also pretty true because sleep tends to regulate my emotions and I wake up with more perspective. I'm probably a better mediator as a result. I laid out the exercises in the same way as previous chapters. I ended up doing all of the exercises as recommended in each section, and as well in the explore section, I chose 3 out of the 10 exercises to try. Perhaps the reason I wasn't getting any fresh insights at first was because I jumped around a lot in this chapter. You're not going to see this in the spreads because I left blank space for the exercises that I skipped and went back to, but I think maybe because I jumped around so much and I didn't do the exercises in order, that was why I was a little bit more scattered, and perhaps that's why the ideas and such didn't come until the very end. For the reaction exercise in the arrive section, once again I listened to myself reading the personal story from the audio clip that's on my website, and I noticed that my routine around waking up has shifted quite a bit since I wrote this book. I still roughly wake up at around the same time and I do the same activities, but the routine is a little bit different, and I've noticed that I tend to tweak my sleep and wake routines. I'm always looking for ways to improve my sleep and to feel more well rested in the morning, and overall I feel like I have a really good relationship with sleep because I value it so much. I really recognize the importance of sleep in my life. I really love my word cloud for this month. I drew a grumpy rabbit and a really happy, exuberant rabbit, and these rabbits represent how well I slept the night before. When I don't get a good night's sleep, I am a grumpy rabbit. I feel lethargic, I feel irritable, sleepy, anxious, I feel fuzzy in my mind. But when I get a good night's sleep and I wake up feeling well rested, I'm very happy, productive, resilient, alert, level-headed, and so on and so forth. I really love this depiction of the contrast in my sleep quality. The pendulum exercise is one of the ones that I skipped and went back to, and I think it would have benefited me to do this a bit earlier. I realize that I'm very interested in the topic of sleep, but I really don't know much about it. Sleep is still very mysterious to me because I don't know what happens when I sleep. Of course, I've read articles about it, the benefits of sleep, the stages of sleep, what happens when we sleep, but I don't know it at an intuitive level. I can research it, but I don't feel like I have the knowledge internally. This was a really interesting distinction that came up that I think showed itself a little bit later as well. I'm gonna flip ahead one page to show you the journal section first because I wanted to do a 2-page spread where I have kind of like a table format similar to something that I did in a previous chapter. I thought this would be a great way to depict the journaling entries. For example, my bedtime in one column, my wake time in another column, and my hours of sleep in another column, and so on. This did help me find some patterns, and I'll flip back to the patterns exercise. My sleep routine overall has been pretty consistent over the past 5 years or so, even though I've made little tweaks along the way. So there was nothing that really came up in patterns that gave me a sense that this was going to be an interesting chapter. And I did the patterns exercise pretty early on before I even did the reaction and the pendulum exercises. So I didn't notice anything too interesting here. All of the patterns were pretty consistent from the other times I've done this reset. Moving into the explore section, once again, I did 3 exercises in this section. I ended up doing bedtime routine, wake up routine, and dreamland. I put my bedtime routine and my wake up routine on one page. I laid this out kind of like a timeline, but also like point form jot notes. I thought I was actually going to use this information to do a video or maybe a couple of videos on my routines, but I ended up running out of time and not filming these videos. But this was really the impetus for me choosing these exercises, was because I thought I would be filming videos on them. It wasn't so much that these exercises sparked my curiosity, so that was my bad. It probably wasn't the best way for me to choose an exercise if I wanted to get some new realizations. But moving on to Dreamland, this was where things started becoming a little bit more interesting for me. Although I have thought about dreaming a lot in the past. Specifically, I've been interested in lucid dreaming. I'm not a lucid dreamer. I don't think I've ever had a lucid dream, maybe once or twice, but not on a regular or consistent basis. So dreams are always very fascinating to me, but I tend to go through phases when I'm interested in dreaming. I'm not really one that logs my dreams all the time. I don't really do a consistent practice when it comes to thinking about my dreams or analyzing my dreams. It's a topic that comes up for me and then it goes away. So Dreamland was something that really appealed to my curiosity, and that's why I chose this exercise, and that's definitely the way to go in the explore section. What I ended up doing was jotting down the main themes of my dream and also how I felt while I was dreaming or when I woke up, and I would go ahead and do this first thing in the morning. I would basically just grab my phone and start writing as much as I could remember. I found that when I could remember my dreams, I remembered quite a bit of detail. Some things were still fuzzy, but a lot of things were still very clear, especially as soon as I woke up. It usually took me 20 to 30 minutes to jot down all of the notes. I mean, I'm not that fast typing on my phone, but still 20 to 30 minutes, I think, is quite a long time to be logging your dreams. This was a fun exercise that showed me that I'm still pretty curious about dreaming from time to time, but I didn't have any aha moments where I thought to myself, this is so good, I'm so excited about this discovery. Moving into the connect section, I really enjoyed the memories exercise. I did something very similar to my relationships chapter, where I did this timeline that I tried to make to scale in terms of where the years are situated on the line. For the majority of my life, up until my late 30s, I was a night owl. So I had a sleep shirt when I was in grade school that said, "No, I won't go to bed!" exclamation point. I loved staying up late. In high school, I would talk on the phone with my friends till the wee hours, and I would end up falling asleep with the receiver beside me. I pulled a couple of all-nighters in university, but even when I didn't pull all-nighters, I would stay up until the wee hours studying or chatting or playing games with my friends. In my early 20s, I was really into clubbing and karaoke. And then there was a portion of my life when I was working full-time that I was really into creative projects. This is when I had my photography business and my Etsy shop. I just had lots of personal creative projects. I think this was around the time that I started YouTube as well. And I would basically sleep in 2 4-hour blocks. I did find some research to support this routine, this way of sleeping, but I didn't feel good about it because I was always tired and I was always lethargic. I would have bursts of energy, but overall, my general energy level was pretty low during this time. So that's when I started experimenting with waking up early. The experiments lasted for about 5 years. Each year I would try to wake up a little bit earlier so I would have more time in the morning before heading off to work. And finally, in 2020, when the pandemic arrived, I had no distractions. I wasn't going out. I wasn't doing anything. It was kind of like this bubble of experimentation where I could really hone my sleep routine and try to figure out what worked best for me. And that's when I started loving early mornings and going to bed early. Sometimes I feel like I've been a morning person my entire life, but looking at this, I know it's not true. It's really only in this most recent stage of my life, from around the time I turned 40, that I've been waking up early, that I consider myself an early bird. I don't have too much to say about the disentangling exercise. To be quite honest, this exercise was a disappointment for me. Usually I have a lot of things come up for me in this section, but Again, it was same old, same old. I really loved perceptions and perspective, but mostly because of how I laid it out on the page. So I used a grumpy rabbit and a happy rabbit again, and this time the grumpy rabbit represents my perceptions, so this is my inner critic. What was neat though is that I realized my inner critic is pretty quiet when it comes to sleep now. She doesn't have too much to say. I think she recognizes that sleep is important to me, and getting enough sleep and a good quality of sleep makes me feel really good. If she did have to find something to say, she would probably say that I sleep too much, that I'm wasting the most productive years of my life. But even as I hear her saying that, I know it's coming from this capitalistic drive to always do more. And I've been really trying to call BS on that whenever I hear myself say something like that. So that was kind of a neat realization that my inner critic is so quiet in this chapter, whereas in other chapters, she is so vocal. And then the happy rabbit represents perspective, or my inner best friend, and she just reminds me that I've become really attuned to my body and when it needs sleep, when it needs rest. And despite sleeping so much and resting so much, I still get a lot done. All of the things I want to do, I am getting done. Since I didn't have much to write in this section, I decided to pull 2 quotes that I was considering for the title page before I chose the quote by the Dalai Lama. So the 2 quotes are, "Without enough sleep, we all become tall 2-year-olds." I love that. And that quote is by Jojo Jensen. And then the other quote I pulled is by Ariana Huffington, who is a big advocate of sleep. She said, "The way to a more productive, more inspired, more joyful life is getting enough sleep." I really enjoyed the interconnections exercise this month. What I ended up doing was, for each area of life, I put good sleep equals, and then I jotted down what effect a good night of sleep has on that area of life. So for example, under food, I put good sleep equals less sugar and caffeine. When I've had a good night of quality sleep in the morning, I don't feel like I need to load up on caffeine. Even though I don't really drink caffeine that much anymore, I crave it less. And I also don't need a whole bunch of sugar. And then in the area of money, I put good sleep equals more clarity with decisions. So I tend to make better financial decisions when I'm feeling well rested versus when I'm feeling tired and grumpy and maybe like very paranoid and anxious. Next, we're moving into the reflect section, and pendulum redux was a pretty interesting exercise for me. At this point, I still wasn't having any insights, but my thoughts started coalescing around what I want to do next. And this is the natural progression of this chapter. By the time you get to reflect, you're looking back, but you're also looking ahead. I kept thinking about how mysterious sleep is, how I'm really interested in learning more about sleep, and specifically, I still was very curious about dreaming. So that was something that came up once again. The looking up exercise was when I started getting an inkling that there might be more to this chapter than I initially thought. So I went ahead and wrote down 5 "I see myself as someone who" statements, but then I thought of one more, so I added it at the bottom, and that was, "I see myself as someone who is eager to experiment with new habits to improve my sleep." And as I wrote that statement, I thought of a few experiments that I've tried in the past, lifestyle changes that I've made that support my sleep. So these are things like caffeine reduction, alcohol reduction, stress management, intermittent fasting, and having a consistent routine. All of these things are things that I've implemented, and maybe the original reason for me experimenting with these things wasn't sleep directly, but all of these things ended up having a positive impact on my sleep, and I realized that sleep is so important to me that I am willing to make changes to my lifestyle in order to support my sleep. The looking up exercise was interesting, but I still didn't get that aha moment that I was looking for, and I was rather disappointed in this chapter. I did the treasures exercise, and again, nothing came up for me. Before the last prompt, which is, "When it comes to sleep, I'm going to try ... I ended up writing, "I'm going to try logging my dreams. I also want to read more about the types of dreams and the stages of sleep." So I wrote that down, and because I was feeling like a bit meh about the chapter, I decided to go ahead and start looking some stuff up. And one of the Google searches that I did was the benefits of dreaming. and this article came up. The article talked about 2 benefits of dreaming. 1 is dreaming as overnight therapy, and 2 is dreaming as a creative or problem-solving tool. This was fascinating to me, and I did a whole video on it, so I'm not going to go into detail now, but that was the aha moment that I was looking for. So if you're interested in that, I will link the video down below. And then moving to the summary page, this is where I share my looking up statements for all 3 of my sleep resets. And I've noticed that for this chapter, because I've been pretty consistent with sleep and I know the value of sleep and sleep is really important to me, my looking up statements have been fairly consistent throughout the 3 resets, but I always get an idea for something that I want to try. So my first reset was in August of 2021, and my looking up statement was, I see myself as someone who wakes up feeling energized and ready to take on the day. And the experiment I decided to try following this sleep reset was taking timed 30-minute power naps rather than having a nap and sleeping as long as I wanted, because I found when I did that, I was oversleeping and I was waking up with sleep inertia. I didn't want to feel the sleep inertia anymore, so I read that 20-minute naps tend to be the best because you don't have the sleep inertia, or you could take a 90-minute nap, which is a full sleep cycle, but often that's too long for me in the middle of the day. So I decided I would try 30 minutes because I do like my sleep, and I also wanted to allow for the time that it takes me to fall asleep. This was a great experiment, and I ended up continuing with this, and now when I do take naps, I generally take timed 20 or 30-minute power naps. My second reset was in January of 2023, and my looking up statement was, I see myself as someone who views sleep as a restorative practice that is vital for my well-being, motivation, and productivity. I just realized how close this statement is to the Ariana Huffington quote that I shared earlier, which I just found recently. So I hadn't read that quote when I wrote this statement. I really like that because it means that I'm noticing these things on my own and within myself rather than just reading about another person's experience or another person's advice. The experiment that came out of this sleep reset was getting up in the morning without pressing the snooze button. So this is something I go back and forth on. It's similar to dreaming where it comes up and then it kind of like fades away. I've gone back and forth with this experiment for many years, and I would say my default is still pressing snooze at least once or twice. But right now, because I'm logging my dreams, I do tend to wake up when my alarm goes off. I've shared my third looking up statement already, but just as a reminder, it is, I see myself as someone who is eager to experiment with new habits to improve my sleep. And the experiment that I'm in right now is finding ways to leverage sleep as a productive tool, or at least as a chance to reset every day. I've already had a few interesting insights about this, but I'm going to continue to gather some more data points. That is it for my sleep reset recap. I hope you enjoyed this video. The next chapter is play, and I'm hoping that's going to be a fun one. So I will be back very soon with the intro video for the play chapter. Until then, please take care and bye for now.